Winter, 1876, southern Arizona. A land so brutal it made men pray for mercy they knew would never come. And on one freezing night, beneath a moon hidden by drifting clouds, a man named Ganondik ran through the darkness carrying a cradle in his arms. His daughter, born just one day ago, whimpered inside that wicker basket, too small to understand that the world was already trying to kill her. Behind him, hooves thundered. U.S. cavalry. The same soldiers who'd shelled his camp at dawn. The same men who'd taken his wife in an explosion of fire and screaming earth. Ganondik didn't look back. He couldn't. Because if he did, he'd see the truth. He was running out of time. His Apache band turned north, disappearing into the rocky folds of the high desert. But the baby in his arms was too fragile for the cold night ahead. Running with her meant risking her life, and the lives of everyone in his band. Staying behind meant certain death. Then he saw it. A single oil lamp glowing from the porch of a lonely homestead, maybe half a mile away. No smoke from the chimney. No dogs barking. Just that soft, steady glow of shelter. And Ganondik made a choice that would change 3 lives forever. He slowed, then stopped entirely, forcing his legs to obey what his heart had already decided. The others didn't notice. They were already swallowed by darkness. He hurried across the open ground, every gust of wind cutting like a knife, every second bringing those cavalry horses closer. When he reached the fence line, he crouched behind a cedar tree and listened. No footsteps, no movement, only the faint hum of that lamp inside the house. He laid the cradle on the porch boards. His daughter, his little Nicky, let out a soft cry, barely louder than a bird's breath. It nearly destroyed him. He touched her cheek with the back of his finger, memorizing her warmth, and placed inside the cradle a small silver pendant shaped in the old way. "Your father walks with you," he whispered in Apache, "even when he cannot hold you." Then he knocked twice and melted back into the shadow. The door opened almost at once. A young woman stood framed in the lantern glow, her nightdress pale against the dark. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, and her eyes were soft with surprise rather than fear. She looked from the cradle to the empty yard, then back to the child. Ganondik held his breath. If she recoiled, if she hesitated, if she shut that door. But she didn't. She stepped forward, gathering Nicky into her arms as if she'd been waiting for her all along. She held the baby against her chest, murmuring something gentle, and a warmth rose in the cold air like the first ray of morning light on winter stone. Ganondik watched, every muscle trembling with the force of the moment. His daughter had found safety. Not in his world, but in hers. The woman looked out across the yard once more, as though trying to find whoever had left the child. The wind tugged at her hair. The lantern flickered. After a long moment she drew Nicky closer and carried her inside, closing the door with quiet care. Only then did Ganondik exhale. Only then did his legs give way, dropping him to a crouch in the dust. He pressed a hand to his chest, whispering thanks to the spirits. He had lost nearly everything that day. His wife, his band, the ground beneath his feet. But the child lived, and she was held by gentle arms. From inside the house came the faintest sound, a woman humming slow and low, weaving comfort into the stillness. Ganondik rose. He couldn't stay, not with the cavalry scouring the land. But he looked once more toward that warm square of lamplight and made a vow, quiet as the breath of dawn. "When the land is calm again, I will return for her, and for the woman who saved her." Then he vanished into the vast, indifferent night. Inside the house, Galena Pierce held the child close, rocking gently beside her kitchen stove. The house felt warmer than it had in months. She hadn't expected company, least of all a newborn. But the moment she looked into those dark, shining eyes, she felt something loosen inside her. Something that had been wound tight since her husband left for the war. The war. Galena blinked hard. She pushed the thought aside. The baby was still cold, so she laid another blanket over her, brushing a hand through the child's fine black hair. She didn't know who had left this little one or why, but she sensed deep in her bones that this child was meant to find her. The house had been too quiet, too empty, the nights too long. "Maybe," she whispered, "you're a gift from heaven, little one." Nicky squirmed, letting out a tiny sigh. Galena smiled for the first time in weeks. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it with this child in her arms. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the promise made in the darkness that night would return to claim everything she'd built. 5 winters passed, and in that time, Galena Pierce built her life around the little girl she'd found on her porch. The world remained harsh, the land dusty and stubborn, but the laughter in her house filled the empty corners, warmed the cold nights, and steadied her heart. Nicky grew the way desert flowers grow, against all odds, with a kind of quiet fire inside her. By the time she was 6, she could outrun most of the boys in town, climb the cottonwood tree behind the barn, and ask more questions than any preacher could answer. She had her mother's stubborn streak, everyone said, but her eyes were darker, deeper. When the sun hit them just right, a ring of amber shone around the black, like flame circling night. Galena loved that child more fiercely than she had ever loved anything. What she didn't love was the way folks in the settlement talked. Some whispered that Nicky must have Apache blood. "Just look at her," they'd say behind Galena's back. Others muttered uglier things, suggesting Galena had taken up with a warrior while her husband was away. They didn't know that her husband had never come back from the war. They didn't know the way she still woke some nights drenched in tears, the memory of that telegram slicing through her chest. "Killed in action near Fort Low." She ignored the gossip as best she could, but Nicky heard things too. Children could be cruel. And more than once, she came home with her shoulders hunched and her small face pinched tight. "They say I don't have a father," she whispered once, clutching her slate to her chest. "They say I look too different." Galena knelt and gathered her close. "Every child has a father," she said firmly. "And you were loved the moment you were born. That's all you need to know." It seemed enough, until the day it wasn't. It happened on a mild afternoon in late spring, the kind where the air smelled of warm dirt and juniper, and the wind hummed low through the grass. Galena was inside kneading dough when the kitchen fell unusually quiet. Too quiet. "Nicky," she called. No answer. She stepped outside, wiping flour from her hands, and froze. Nicky stood in the middle of the yard talking to a tall Apache man. Sun-browned skin. Long dark hair tied back with a leather cord. A bow slung over one shoulder. He crouched to be level with her, speaking softly, the wind catching pieces of his words. His presence should have frightened her, should have made her scream. But Nicky stood steady, curious rather than afraid. Galena's blood turned ice cold. "Get away from her!" she cried, running and scooping Nicky into her arms. "Nicky, how many times have I told you not to speak to strangers?" Nicky blinked at her in confusion. "But Mama, he's not a stranger. He said he's my father." Galena's heart lurched. Her grip tightened around Nicky as she turned toward the man, breath shaking. "Why would you say something like that to a child?" she demanded, fury trembling in her voice. "What kind of man plays cruel jokes on little girls?" "I do not joke," the man said quietly. His English was marked with the cadence of another tongue, each word slow and careful. "My name is Ganondik. I left a baby on this porch 6 winters ago. My baby." Galena felt her pulse roar in her ears. Her legs wanted to give way beneath her, but she held her ground. "No," she said sharply. "Nicky's father died serving this country. I won't have you confuse her with whatever this is." The man did not react in anger. He simply looked at her with a steady, grounding gaze, as though he had expected this resistance long before he arrived. "I remember that night," he said. "The cedar tree on the south side, the lamp glowing in the window. You picked her up before the cold could take her. You saved her." Galena's breath caught. The cedar tree, the lamp. Details no stranger could have guessed. But she pushed the tremor aside. People lied. People imitated. The world was full of schemes. She hugged Nicky closer. This is our home. I want you gone. Nikki stared between them, small hands gripping her mother's dress. Mama, she whispered, voice cracking. Is he really my father? I want a father. All the kids say I don't have one. Galena swallowed against the sudden sting in her eyes. Nikki's sobs rose like a wounded thing, shaking her whole little body. I want him, Nikki cried. I want to know him. Nikki, enough, Galena whispered, helpless, trying to hush her as tears streaked down her own cheeks. The man stepped back, letting distance cool the moment. His eyes dropped, not in shame, but in understanding. I will not take her, he said. She is safe. That is what matters. He paused, voice roughening at the edges. I only wished to see her, to see if she lived. Without another word, he turned and walked away across the dusty yard, the wind tugging at his shirt, carrying his footsteps toward the hills. Galena held Nikki tight. The child sobbed until exhaustion pulled her breaths into hiccups. By the time she finally slept, curled in her mother's lap, the sun had melted behind the ridges and the sky burned the color of a dying ember. But the story wasn't over. Not even close. That night, long after Nikki was in bed, someone knocked softly on the door. Once, then twice. Galena's heart tripped. She opened it to find the same man standing there, hands empty. You do not have to believe me, he said. But tell me this. Did you not find a silver pendant with the child? A small piece shaped in the old way? The question struck her like a blow. In a wooden box beneath her sewing needles lay a pendant she had never been able to throw away. The one she'd found in Nikki's cradle. The one no one else knew about. And suddenly, the world seemed to tilt under her feet. The pendant lay in Galena's palm, small enough to hide beneath her thumb, yet heavy enough to bend the whole night around it. She hadn't touched the thing in years, had nearly convinced herself it meant nothing, just an odd trinket left with a forsaken child. But now, staring at the man on her porch, the memory of that freezing night came flooding back. The knock, the cradle, the shiver in her bones, the lantern glow catching on a tiny silver charm. Ganondik saw the truth in her eyes before she spoke it. She had this, Galena whispered, wrapped in a scrap of deer hide. He nodded once. No triumph, no satisfaction, only quiet confirmation, as if a long-feared truth had simply arrived on schedule. Nikki's soft breathing carried from the back room, steady with sleep. The sound seemed to anchor the two adults between worlds. One familiar, one frighteningly new. May I? Ganondik asked, motioning to the pendant. Galena hesitated, then placed it in his hand. He closed his fingers gently around it, bowing his head. A breath left him, shaky, almost reverent. When he looked up again, something unguarded flickered across his face. She is mine, he said softly. My blood. My heart. Galena's chest tightened. She leaned against the doorframe, bracing herself from the rush of emotions climbing through her ribs. Why come now? She asked. After all these years? Because I could not come sooner, he answered, voice lowering. Soldiers hunted us across these lands. Many died. I believed if I stayed too close, I would bring danger upon the child. But when the raids lessened, when the winter passed without blood, I knew I had to find her. His gaze drifted toward the room where Nikki slept. I expected she might be gone, he murmured. Or sickly, or unloved. He lifted his eyes to Galena's, steady and grateful. But she is strong. And safe. Because of you. The sincerity in his tone unsettled her more than any threat could have. Galena folded her arms, not in defiance, but in self-defense. She's my daughter. I've raised her as such. I know, he replied. I do not wish to take her. Only to know her. The words softened something deep inside her, and that frightened her most of all. She shook her head. It's too late. She sees you as a stranger. He didn't argue. He only stepped back from the doorway. When she asks for me again, he said. "I will be near." Then he disappeared into the dark, leaving Galina alone with a truth she had no idea how to hold. In the days that followed, Nikki grew strangely quiet. She pushed her food around her plate, wandered the yard without her usual spark, and asked questions Galina had no ready answers for. "Why didn't you tell me I was different? Did my real father leave me because he didn't want me? Am I still your daughter?" Each question chipped at Galina's heart, leaving marks no one else could see. She tried to distract the girl with chores, lessons, stories, but a child's heart always circles back to what troubles it most. One morning, Nikki sat at the kitchen table tracing patterns in spilled flour. "Mama," she said softly, "if he's my father, why does he look at me like he knows me?" Galina froze. 1,000 reasons swirled through her mind, none of them fit to speak. Instead, she said, "Because men like him see the world differently." Nikki frowned. "I liked him. He was gentle." Those words struck deeper than Galina expected. Gentle. She'd seen it too, despite her fear, despite her anger. 2 evenings later, as dusk bled into violet over the hills, Galina found Ganondik at the edge of her property. He wasn't hiding, merely waiting, hands clasped loosely, tall frame outlined against the last of the sunset. She walked to him with more caution than she would admit. "You shouldn't be here," she said, though her tone had softened. He dipped his chin. "I know. I just wished to ask if Nikki is well." Galina hesitated, then sighed. "She's confused. Hurt, even." A shadow passed across his face. "It was not my wish to bring her pain." They stood silent a moment. The wind rustled dry grass around their boots. Somewhere far off, a cow lowed. "How do you expect this to work?" Galina asked finally. "You appear after 6 years and what? Become part of her life?" He didn't flinch at the edge in her voice. "I expect nothing, but I hope." "Hope for what?" "For a chance," he answered simply. "To know my daughter. To show her who she comes from. To honor the woman who saved her." Galina's breath hitched, not at the words themselves, but at how softly they were spoken. Another silence drifted between them, different from the first, less harsh, less guarded. Ganondik looked toward her porch light. "She is happy here. That is plain." "She's my whole world," Galina whispered. "And she is the last piece of mine," he responded. Something in his tone, a tremor of sorrow, of gratitude, of yearning layered beneath years of hardship, strained the careful wall she had built around herself. She shifted uncomfortably, trying to regain the upper hand. "Nikki can't bear more confusion. If you want to be near her, it must be slow, gentle, nothing rash." "I can be patient," he said. As he spoke, the moon rose behind him, lighting the rugged lines of his face. For one dangerous moment, Galina felt something she hadn't let herself feel since her husband's death. An unexpected pull, like warmth after a long, cold season. She looked away quickly. "This doesn't mean I trust you." "No," he agreed. "But it means there is a path." She didn't reply. But she didn't walk away either. They stood together in the quieting dusk. 2 strangers bound by a child, by loss, and though neither dared name it yet, by the faintest spark of something that might one day become love. Spring settled over the valley in a thin wash of green, softening the brittle edges of the land. The storms eased, the winds gentled, and in that same slow, cautious way, something inside Galina began to ease as well. Not enough for comfort, not enough for trust, but enough that when she saw Ganondik's tall silhouette near the cottonwood tree, she no longer reached for the shotgun behind the door. He kept his distance at first, visiting only when called by Nikki's questions or Galina's reluctant allowance. He'd stand in the yard like a man half welcome, hands loose at his sides, eyes searching her face for permission before stepping any closer. Galina didn't understand why that gentleness unsettled her more than any threat could have. It was Nikki who broke the cold ground between them. She had been running a fever one night, nothing fierce, but enough to make her cheeks rosy and her breath quick. Galina had tried everything she knew, cool cloths, willow bark tea, prayers whispered across the still room. But the child remained restless, tossing and turning with whimpers caught in her throat. Around midnight, a soft tap sounded on the door. Galina opened it to find Ganondik standing beneath the porch beam, moonlight silvering his hair. He lifted a small leather pouch. "I heard she was sick," he said. "May I help?" Galina should have said no, should have shut the door and barred it. But something in Nicky's exhausted cries hollowed her resolve. "What's in it?" she asked wearily. "Ground yarrow and wild mint," he replied. "My mother used it for fevers. It brings the heat out." His voice held no pride, no force, just the calm of someone offering what he knew best. Against her better judgment, Galina stepped aside. He entered quietly, pausing as though afraid to disturb the air. Nicky lay on the couch, sweat beading along her small brow. The sight of her pulled a deep ache across his face, an ache he tried to hide, but failed. He knelt, murmuring something under his breath, a few soft Apache words that sounded like a blessing. Then he brewed the herbs with practiced hands, filling the room with a warm, fresh scent. Galina watched from the stove, arms folded, but mind drifting. The lamplight softened his profile, catching the curve of his jaw, the steadiness of his movements. It felt strange having a man in her home again. Stranger still, that she wasn't afraid. After Nicky drank the tea, her breathing settled. Her small fingers clutched at the blanket. And finally, her eyes closed. When it was clear the fever had eased, Galina exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Thank you," she murmured. He looked up, surprised. "You take good care of her. Any father would be grateful." She flinched at the word father, but didn't correct him. Not this time. He rose to leave, stepping toward the door. But before he reached it, a gust of cool night air swept through the room, flickering the lantern flame. "Would you stay a moment?" The words slipped from Galina before she could reclaim them. He froze, turning slowly. "If you wish." They sat near the stove, him on the chair, her on the wood box, about an arm's length apart, the quiet thick between them. Outside, coyotes called their lonely songs into the dark. In here, the only sound was the soft pop of pine burning in the stove. Galina found her fingers twisting her apron strings. "I didn't expect you to be." She hesitated. "This gentle." A faint smile tugged at the corner of Ganondik's mouth. "My people are not the monsters your town believes." "I know that," she said, though part of her still didn't. Not fully. Not yet. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. "You loved her before you knew who she was. That speaks more than any law, any blood." Galina looked away sharply, her heart thudding with a strange, unwelcome warmth. And in that moment, something shifted between them, something neither could take back. The next days unfolded differently. Ganondik came by with small offerings for Nicky, a carved wooden bird, a handful of desert berries, a flute made of yucca stalk. Nicky adored every one of them, tugging him eagerly toward the cottonwood tree or the creek bed behind the house. Galina would watch from the porch, arms crossed but face softer than she meant it to be. One afternoon, while Nicky splashed in the creek, Ganondik joined Galina at the fence where she was repairing a loose rail. Without speaking, he knelt beside her and lifted the other end. Their fingers brushed. She felt the warmth of him, the calluses of his palm, the steadiness beneath it all. For one fragile second, neither moved. When their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, dangerous, tender, irreversible. She was the first to break away, turning sharply to reach for another nail. He didn't press, didn't comment. But the moment stayed between them like a live ember waiting for breath. Toward the end of the week, a new tension crept into the valley. Rumors from town traveled fast. Folks whispered that Galina was keeping company with an Apache. Others muttered about sending word to the fort. One evening, as the sun flattened into the horizon, Galina found Ganondik standing near the barn, scanning the ridge with narrowed eyes. "What is it?" she asked. "Riders," he said quietly. "Far off. Not coming here yet. But soldiers patrol more now." Her pulse jumped. Because of you? Because of fear, he corrected, then glanced at her. But I will not bring danger to your home. If you wish me gone. No, she interrupted, surprising herself. Don't leave, unless I ask you to. He studied her with an expression she couldn't read, part respect, part gratitude, and part something deeper, warmer. I will stay near, he said. Galena nodded, though her breath trembled. She stepped back, ready to retreat inside, but Nikki burst out of the barn with a fistful of feathers. Mama, she squealed. Daddy Ganondik says he can teach me to make a dream flute. Galena froze. Ganondik froze. The word, Daddy, hung in the air like a shot fired across the plains. But when she looked at Nikki's face, hopeful, glowing, utterly certain, something inside her softened in a way she could no longer deny. For the first time, she didn't correct the child. For the first time, she let the words settle where it belonged. And Ganondik, standing in the fading sunlight, lowered his head as though receiving a blessing he had never dared to pray for. Summer rode into the valley hard that year, flattening the grass and baking the earth until it cracked like old pottery. The heat pressed on the land and on Galena's conscience until both felt close to breaking. Ever since Nikki called him Daddy Ganondik, something had shifted between all three of them. A closeness, a dangerous tenderness. Galena tried to ignore it, telling herself affection was not the same as trust. Yet the way Nikki ran to him, the way his eyes softened when he saw the child, and the quiet respect he offered her, it all worked like slow water on stone. But the world outside their little homestead was not softening. Word reached Galena through town whispers. Soldiers had been asking questions about Apache movements, and someone spiteful, had mentioned her name. The widow up north, they said. She's keeping an Apache near her land. Galena felt the bottom drop out of her stomach when she heard it. The memory of the telegram declaring her husband dead returned like a ghost. Cold, sharp, merciless. She knew soldiers did not forgive easily, and she knew some in town would love nothing more than to see her shamed or driven off. She didn't tell Nikki. She didn't tell Ganondik either. Fear, she found, could make a person selfish. One evening, while Nikki napped on a quilt under the cottonwood tree, Galena sat with Ganondik near the porch. The air was thick with the scent of sage and dust. Crickets clicked in the growing dark. She could feel the weight of something unspoken hanging between them. I've been hearing talk, she began, twisting her fingers together. Talk that the soldiers are hunting a band. Maybe your people. Ganondik's jaw tightened. They always hunt us. This is different, she insisted. They're asking about a man who lost a wife in a raid. A man with a newborn. A man who might be coming back for his child. His eyes flickered. Pain, and something like regret, mixing into a look she'd never seen on him before. I thought the worst had passed, he murmured. I thought they were done searching for us. Galena swallowed. Ganondik, if they find you here, I know. His voice was low, steady. But I will not abandon Nikki again. Her breath tangled in her chest. She looked down, then forced herself to speak the question that had haunted her for weeks. The raid, the one you escaped from. Do you know who led it? The officer? The men? Silence hit them like a hammer. Ganondik didn't look at her. Instead, he stared across the fields as if watching ghosts rise out of the heat. I know their colors, he said finally. Blue coats. The 6th Cavalry. They came before dawn. His voice thickened. They shelled the canyon first. Women were still sleeping. Children waking. Some ran. Some didn't have time. Galena's stomach twisted. My wife was killed, he said quietly. My child nearly with her. I carried Nikki through smoke so thick it burned her newborn skin. There were soldiers firing on anything that moved. No warnings, no mercy. His words were steady, but they cut like a blade. Galena's hands trembled, because in a drawer beneath her bed lay a folded, creased telegram. Corporal Thomas Pierce, 6th Cavalry, killed in action near Fort Lowe. She closed her eyes, nausea crawling up her throat. Ganondik, she whispered. What if one of those soldiers was my husband? He didn't move, didn't speak, even the wind held its breath. She continued, choking on every word. What if he helped cause that massacre? What if the same men who took your wife were the ones Nicky calls my father's friends? Ganondik's shoulders rose and fell in a slow, pained breath. When Nicky was born, he said after a long moment, I prayed for her life. I prayed someone gentle would find her. I did not pray for revenge. That doesn't answer me, she whispered. His gaze shifted toward her, dark, heavy, unreadable. No truth changes what you have done for her, he said. You gave her a mother's love, a mother's life. That stands taller than any blood spilled. But if Thomas was part of that raid, she pressed, voice breaking, then I am tied to your loss, to your pain, to everything you suffered. Ganondik shook his head slowly. You are tied to Nicky, and nothing else. But she could hear the fracture beneath his calm. They both felt it. That night, sleep refused to come. Galena lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the wind move through the eaves. Every memory of her husband twisted painfully now. Every affectionate word, every front porch goodbye, every reminder of honor and duty. All of it felt tainted by the possibility of what he might have done. Near midnight, she stepped outside to breathe in the cooler air and found Ganondik standing by the fence line, arms crossed, head bowed. He didn't turn when she approached. You knew, didn't you? She whispered. Or guessed. I feared, he answered. Feared what it would mean for you, and for me. Galena's throat tightened. And what does it mean? That we carry scars carved by the same blade. She looked at him, then, really looked, and she saw the truth. Not just in his words, but in his posture, in the weary bend of his shoulders. He was not her enemy. She was not his. They were two broken people trying to hold the same child steady in a world that only knew how to tear things apart. I'm sorry, she whispered, for what my husband might have done, for what it cost you. He closed his eyes. And I am sorry that you must carry sorrow not of your making. They stood in the moonlight, no longer strangers bound only by a child, but two people standing on the same fault line of grief. And in that quiet, aching moment, understanding slipped between them. Not forgiveness yet, not peace, but the beginning of both. Nicky's small voice broke the stillness. Mama? Daddy Ganondik? She stood at the porch, rubbing her eyes, her braid loose over her shoulder. Galena reached for her. Ganondik did too. And as Nicky pressed her small hands into both of theirs, Galena felt a gentle shift inside herself, like the earth settling after a long tremor. No truth, no past, no death could change the fact that they were a family now. Bruised, complicated, but real. And tomorrow, whatever it brought, they would face it together. Autumn crept into the valley with a soft hand that year, brushing gold along the cottonwoods and cooling the nights until the air tasted faintly of wood smoke and early frost. Life, after that night of confessions, did not return to what it had been. Could not return. But it didn't fall apart either. Instead, something cautious and fragile began to take shape between Galena and Ganondik. The way a sapling pushes up from burned earth. Small. Improbable. But stubborn enough to live. They spoke more openly now, though never without care. Pain still lived between them, but it no longer stood like a wall. It was more like a river they learned to cross together, hand in hand when needed, alone when silence felt kinder. The world outside didn't quiet quite so gently. Soldiers patrolled more often. Riders passed on the ridge, kicking up dust that drifted toward the homestead like distant thunder. Carter, the rancher who disliked Indians meddling with white women, made it known in town that Galena had lost her good sense. But his words carried less weight than he thought. Folks were tired of conflict, tired of fear, tired of the way the desert swallowed widows and children whole if no one stepped in to help. And Galena, soft-spoken, hard-working Galena, had more quiet support than she realized. Still, the risk remained. And risk forced choices. One night, After putting Nikki to bed, Galena found Ganondik sitting on the porch steps, sharpening a long hunting knife beneath the lantern's glow. The steady rasp of stone on steel carried through the dark. She sat beside him, drawing her shawl tight around her shoulders. "Will they come here?" she asked. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe not. But I will not let them take her, or harm you." Her heart tightened at the calm in his voice. Not bravado, simply certainty. She watched his hands move, the lamplight catching the small silver pendant now hanging around his neck. Nikki's pendant, a piece of their shared pain and hope, polished into something like belonging. "I can't live waiting for soldiers to knock on my door," she said softly. He lowered the blade. "Then don't." She stared, breath stilled in her chest. "What do you mean?" "Come with me," he said. "To my band, my people." Galena's pulse roared. "They will take you. Take Nikki. You saved one of ours. They will not forget." Her fingers trembled. I don't know their ways. I don't know how to live like that." "You will learn," he said, "and you will not be alone." The lantern's flame wavered, throwing warm gold across his features. For the first time, Galena saw not simply a father or a survivor, but a man who had opened a door he never expected to open again. A man offering her a life. A small, unguarded piece of her reached toward him before she could stop it. "Do you truly want that?" she whispered. "Want me there? With you?" He met her eyes without flinching. "I want what makes Nikki whole." A pause. "And I want what brings my own heart peace." The words settled into her the way rain settles into thirsty ground. 3 weeks later, they packed the wagon. Galena sold what she didn't need and gave the rest to neighbors who'd shown kindness. The house, once a cage of loneliness, now felt too small for the life ahead of them. Nikki bounced between excitement and nerves, carrying her doll, her slate, her mother's books, treasures she feared leaving behind. On the morning they left, a few townsfolk gathered to see them off. Mrs. Wallace from the mercantile pressed bread into Galena's hands. Old Mr. Henley tipped his hat to Nikki and said, "You take care of your folks now, hear?" Even the schoolteacher, stern and tight-lipped, offered a nod that bordered on respect. Carter watched from a distance, scowling, arms crossed. But he didn't interfere. Not with Ganondik standing beside the wagon, tall and still as an oak, bow slung across his back like a quiet warning. Galena climbed onto the wagon seat. Nikki scrambled between her and Ganondik, hands clutching theirs. With a crack of the reins, the horse started forward. The homestead faded behind them. Ahead lay a long stretch of open desert, glowing pink in the sunrise. And for the first time in years, Galena felt something she'd forgotten how to feel. Hope. Life with the Apache band was hard, different, but not unkind. Galena learned quickly how to grind corn on stone, how to braid rope from yucca fibers, how to read the sky for weather signs. Women taught her their songs. Elders taught her patience. Children accepted Nikki instantly, delighted by her fearless climbing and her clear laughter. And Ganondik stayed close, not possessive, not assuming, just present, in a way that steadied her heart. He taught Nikki to ride a small pony. He brought Galena water gourds on hot days. He carved her a wooden comb with delicate etchings of mountains and goats. Little by little, their closeness grew roots. The first night she took his hand in hers, he looked at her as though a star had fallen into his palm, and she realized she hadn't felt lonely in months. A year later, beneath a sky thick with summer constellations, Galena gave birth to their child. A boy with dark hair and blue-tinged eyes that mirrored both parents. Ganondik held her through the long hours of labor. When the child finally slipped into the world, crying and fierce, he pressed his forehead to hers and whispered, "Thank you for making my heart whole again." Nikki, now older and proud as a little guardian, named him Talon, after the hawks that circled the mesa. That night, their small lodge glowed with firelight and peace. Galena cradled the newborn against her chest, watching Nikki sleep curled beside Ganondik, one hand protectively over her baby brother. A family, unlikely, imperfect, born of tragedy, yet mended by love, rested in the quiet glow. Galena looked at the man beside her, the children between them, and felt a peace she had never thought possible. "Are you happy?" he murmured. She kissed their son's warm brow. "More than I ever dared hope." Outside, the desert wind hummed through the sage, carrying their future with it, wide, uncertain, beautiful. And for the first time in many years, Galena welcomed all of it with an open, fearless heart. If you enjoyed this story of love, loss, and second chances against all odds, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment below telling me what part hit you hardest. And remember, sometimes the family you build is stronger than the one you're born into. See you in the next story.